Hello, my friend. This is Existential Courage according to Martin Heidegger. Now, speaking about courage and Heidegger, it's important to separate out the early Heidegger from the later Heidegger, because it's a completely different model of courage or vitality or ways of living. And that's important because the early Heidegger went a little astray with his National Socialism, and you can see a kind of link there with his early ideas. But the later Heidegger had a very different view of the world. He had become quite chastened about his beliefs, as you will see. So the early Heidegger, the landmark book, is Being in Time. And in Being in Time, he defines human beings as Dasein, being there, which is not being a separate human being as an entity, but is to be embedded in a world. It is to be part of a world that you are concerned with, and that he pointed out we care about inevitably, because we go out of ourselves towards that world because we are never sufficient to ourselves. But that creates the problem, because we are outward facing towards a world, and we are facing a crowd around us. And so we become oppressed by what Heidegger, the early Heidegger, called the dictatorship of the day, of das Mann, the anonymous humanity that we perceive as giving us the rules for how we ought to live our lives. So before we can show courage, we have to first recognize that we are trapped by this being enveloped by human beings who dictate to us, or rather enveloped by our imagination of this anonymous person who is always in charge of us and is always telling us what to do and what not to do. So this anonymous crowd has a lot of resemblance with Kierkegaard's descriptions of the crowd and the need to stand out of it as an individual. It also has some resemblance with Nietzsche's work and his dislike of the herd and of obedience to the herd. So the one is the enemy, as it were, to beat for early Heidegger. And you do this by stopping, allowing yourself to be comforted, by just being part of the group, by just doing as other people do, by imitation, by tranquilizing yourself, by not taking responsibility. And during that phase where we are so absorbed by our belonging to the crowd, we are, Heidegger says, in a state of falling, Verfallensein, being fallen into the crowd, being fallen away from ourselves, fleeing from ourselves, he often says. So, existential courage then, for the early Heidegger, is to retrieve your independence, your responsibility, breaking free from the gravitational pull of das Man, of the they, of the one. That requires true strength, true determination to stick with your own deliberations, your own investigations, your own path, and not allow the crowd to dictate to you what the meaning of life should be. This means that you accept the destabilizing feeling of anxiety that you get when you realize responsibility rests in you, is in your capable hands. Responsibility will make you anxious, will make you feel destabilized, solitary, removed from the crowd, and becoming solely responsible for your existence. This always comes with that anxiety, and guilt, and it is the only way in which, for the early Heidegger, you're going to become capable of the courage to live towards death, to anticipate your death, to be aware of your death, to be aware that your death is the unsurpassable reality, which doesn't just happen because you're mortal at the end of your life. It happens now, in every minute. There is a reminder of that dying, of you needing to live towards that loss, towards that failing of your possibilities. Because death, the early Heidegger says in Being and Time, is our most authentic, non-relational, non-crowd-based, insuperable possibility. Even though it is the end of all possibilities, it is actually the most important possibility, for no one can die for you, and you cannot escape from your death. It is the one thing you must face alone. So Heidegger makes a clear distinction between anxiety or angst and fear, Furcht. Fear always has a specific object. You are afraid of something, of a spider, of the loss of a job, of some other person, of something happening to you. Fear is always of something concrete, specific. Anxiety, however, has no object. Anxiety is that generalized, chilling realization of the insignificance of your comforts, of your worldly structures, when faced with that absolute horizon of the possibility of non-being. So, what is existential courage for Heidegger, the early Heidegger? It is the readiness for this very anxiety, the willingness to look directly to death and to how anxious it makes you, to courageously accept your finitude, to let go of the trivial distractions of comforting yourself with the they, with das Man, with the one. Then the crowd no longer has power over you, because you stop wanting to please, you stop wanting to be part of it, you stop wanting to compete, you stop wanting to be better than others or equal to others. You simply seek to face your own anxiety and your own death. It liberates you. It snaps you into the present. It reveals to you that time is limited and that your choices matter intensely. This is what Heidegger, the early Heidegger, called resoluteness. You become resolute, entschlossen. And this comes with your awareness of your conscience. So you hear what he calls the call of conscience, the Gewissensruf. This is not the voice of God, and it is not the voice of social morality either. It is, Heidegger says, the silent internal call of your own suppressed potential self. It is summoning you out of being lost in the crowd, and it summons you to become capable of becoming your own most self. That is the resoluteness. That is the equivalent of existential courage in the early Heidegger. So, in the later Heidegger, however, things change considerably. Heidegger by now had gone through many different crises, including realizing he'd made a big mistake trying to become the philosopher of National Socialism, including realizing that one of his sons he wasn't the father of, realizing that both his sons were at risk in the war, realizing he had lost his position in the world because of his terrible mistake to become a Nazi, essentially. He went through a wake-up call and went away from this rather moralistic tone that he had in his early work. The moralistic tone about preaching at people that being inauthentic is bad and being authentic is good. The moralistic tone that also said that only those who have been called to their conscience can be liberated enough to have this Entschlossenheit, this resoluteness, this existential courage. Only they can be authentic in facing up to their death. And it is also implied that he believed that those who are thus blessed with authenticity can see things directly by their intuition and can therefore tell those who are still inauthentic that their way of life is wrong. And I think this hubris is what really got him into trouble, even though he clearly stated that both authenticity and inauthenticity are aspects of existence, and that we will forever, all of us, experience both ways of being. As I said, the later Heidegger comes to a very different conclusion. It is no longer about resoluteness if you're going to face your existential challenges and find your existential courage. No, after the turn, the kehr, the change in his worldview, the change in his work, he sees things almost upside down. Everything is now back to front because we're no longer seeking to create heroes, authentic heroes who are assertive and willful. No, for the later Heidegger, there is a very different objective. For the later Heidegger, there is a big contrast between those people who think in a calculative way, counting things, measuring things, creating a technocracy, creating a world that is based in calculation and scientific understanding and factuality, and meditative being, and the later and meditative thinking indeed. And the later Heidegger is very much speaking about finding a path towards this way of living. And courage now becomes defined as the courage to let things be, to leave things be as they are, to meditate on how things actually are. And he uses the term Gelassenheit, the letting be-ness, if you like, which is often translated into English as releasement, releasing something in yourself so that you connect up with being. Rather than affirming your being, you connect up to the ground of being. You let it be. You welcome it. You allow being to be. You find serenity. So this serenity is also courageous, but it is courageous in a different way. It doesn't act so fast. It doesn't aim to achieve things. It doesn't aim for authenticity or superiority or certainty. It doesn't plan. It doesn't organize. It doesn't think in this calculative way. It doesn't strive for efficiency. True existential courage for the later Heidegger is the willingness to practice meditative thinking, besinnliches Denken, which is meaning-seeking thinking, meaning-making thinking. So the later Heidegger finds courage in finding meaning and allowing things to be connected exactly as they are connected. This is not an apathy or a weakness. It is a highly active, dynamic, disciplined, psychological way to become awakened to what is actually the case in truth in the world. The courage to step off the treadmill of constant doing, optimizing, and controlling. It is to meet something transcendent, which is being. Now Heidegger comes fully into his path of ontology, of having a science of being, a full understanding of being. And it is this that makes you strong and brave, to let things be precisely as they are, without trying to exploit them, categorize them, force them into utilitarian agendas. Now we open up to the mystery. That's why I wrote that book, Everyday Mysteries. We open to the mystery, to the secrets of life, which we will never fully fathom but we always need to seek to understand nevertheless. Heidegger, in his later work, is much more concerned about how we have banished what is sacred and how we have lost our capacity for wonder, which was the very starting point of phenomenology, which he had previously kind of been a little bit fast and loose about. The capacity for wonder that comes when we open our heart to the secret of mystery and to life itself, to being itself. This takes true courage to turn, with Heidegger, towards a different modality of being in the world, one that is allowing you to bathe in not knowing, in mystery, to be open to this and to accept your limitations as a human being, to refuse to hide behind false certainties or technological progress. It means to stand in the quiet but still anxious clearing of existence and listen for the deepest of truth. And Heidegger speaks about the ereignis, the event when all this comes clear, when light shines in the clearing, when we reappropriate being and we become part of being once more, and we also adopt being. We become the shepherd of being. We dwell in what he called poetically the fourfold, das Gewirr. And the fourfold has some links with my four worlds as well. So there is now a gentle acceptance of finitude and a being part of a wider cosmos. There are hints of human beings opening to the divine, even though he is quite cautious around that idea. So, the later Heidegger has the courage and the stamina and the patience to wait without despairing. It is what Friedrich Hölderlin, Heidegger's favorite poet, called waiting and looking for the saving power, which is greatest precisely when danger grows. So that is the later Heidegger's sense of the monumental bravery required of each of us to unshield ourselves from the world, to stop forcing our will upon existence, and to listen deeply to the silent call of being. Although he calls us the shepherds of being, I think the truth of the matter is that it is really about rediscovering how being shepherds us.